Welcome to the Wellbeing and Career World podcast. I'm delighted to be chatting with the first openly HIV-positive person hired to work for UNAIDS in 1996. She subsequently worked for the United Nations system for 20 years, advocating globally for the rights of people living with HIV. Her collaborative work also led to a mandatory HIV in the Workplace programme internal to the United Nations system, facilitating platforms for freer dialogue and a more supportive environment for all personnel, including LGBTQ, persons with disabilities and other marginalised population. Martina holds a BA in International Relations and an MFA in Creative Writing and Literature. Currently, she is an adjunct for LaGuardia Community College, part of CUNY, where she teaches English 101 and critical reading to NYC public high school students earning college credits early. Her award-winning debut book, My Unexpected Life, an international memoir of two pandemics, HIV and COVID-19, was published in October 2021, and an audio version will be available from January 2023. And on today's podcast, we'll be chatting about My Unexpected Life with HIV. Very well welcome to the podcast, Martina Clark. How are you today, Martina?
I'm great. Thank you so much for having me.
No, my pleasure. I'm excited to chat with you. So we spoke briefly before I pressed the fancy record button. So where are you right now on planet Earth?
Right now, I am on the land of the Lenape, which is most popularly known as Brooklyn, New York.
Oh, very nice. Very, very. So is it getting chilly now? Is the weather? How is it? Pretend you're some sort of tourism board official. So how are you going to sell Brooklyn? Is it nice and Christmassy and all the lights and?
It is rapidly approaching holiday season weather, which means it's kind of grey and cold.
Oh, grey and cold.
But not terrible.
Oh, we don't mind that. It has a nice vibe, especially around that this time of year and that part of the States. So I gave a brief introduction about your background. So can your listeners know a little bit more about yourself?
Yes. Where do I even begin?
Anywhere. Start when you were born.
Well, the quick version, I was born in New Mexico, the state of New Mexico, and grew up in California, and have actually lived in a few different places around the world. And now I find New York is home, but I'm desperately trying to get back to California.
Right.
That's where my heart is, even if my physical person is not there yet.
Okay.
And today, in 2022, I'm an adjunct professor at LaGuardia Community College, which is part of CUNY, the City University of New York City. And I teach English and critical reading and global politics. And in January, I'll teach public speaking. But before all of that, in 1992, when I was 28 and sort of planning what I thought my life might look like, I was diagnosed with HIV and told I probably had 5 years to live.
Wow. Okay. Especially at 28 years of age. Yeah, that's a bit of a shock. Yeah.
To say the least.
Yes. And I mean, right, let's generally give an overview first for any listeners. I mean, what is HIV? Before we go really deep into when you got your diagnosis, you were very young. So what is HIV in the most basic, simplistic explanation?
The very simple explanation is HIV is an acronym for Human Immunodeficiency Virus. It is transmitted person to person, primarily through sexual contact. And if untreated, it is the pathogen that can lead to AIDS, which can kill you if you don't have treatment.
Okay.
So that's the easy version.
The easy version. Right. So when you heard then the news, Martina, when you're 28 years of age, why first did you hear the news? I mean, were you experiencing any symptoms? Did you have any issues or problem? Or was it just a norm to get tested in that time, if you know what I mean?
Right. No, it was actually, so I was in San Francisco in California, which is a very liberal city, and a lot of gay people have made that their home.
Okay.
And in the early 90s, late 80s, there were a lot of people living with HIV. It was media campaigns every place, but the messages were all targeting gay men.
Right.
And I, at the same time, was having symptoms just not feeling well, a general malaise, not any one thing that was easy to figure out, for several months. And so my doctor actually said to me, well, you're a single woman, you're not married. Let's do an HIV test because I don't know what else to do. And that was why he tested me. I had been tested previously to donate blood, but that had been several years prior. So he tested me, and I think as much to his surprise as mine, it came back positive. He said he'd never had a patient with HIV, which, again, considering the context and the timing and the location, was a little bit surprising, but it is what it is. And then I just felt, to be honest, I felt like my life had just been wiped clean. Like everything that had happened up until that moment when I heard the news ceased to be relevant. And not in a good way.
Right.
Starting over.
Of course, yeah. Of course.
Everything just got wiped clean. And here I was with this news that I was 28 and 5 years to live, thinking, oh my God, what do I even do? How do I proceed? And I just sort of felt like I had nothing to lose. Right. And I became an activist because I didn't know what else to do. And it made me feel like I was staying one step ahead of the virus.
And was there, at that time specifically, there was a lot of, now correct me if I'm totally wrong here, but was there a lot of ignorance out there in relation to HIV and AIDS, especially possibly on media platforms? Because when you got that diagnosis when you're 28 years of age, I'm hoping that you got the support that you needed. If you understand what I'm trying to get at here, is that there was a bit of a taboo about HIV and AIDS. I don't know what it was like in the States specifically, but I know in other parts of Europe, there was this kind of associated, as you mentioned, just with one area, and it didn't talk about all areas.
Exactly. No, there was still a huge amount of stigma and discrimination. And as you mentioned, like, at least in North America, the messaging was really targeted towards gay men in particular, and necessarily so, because that community was being hit the hardest.
Right.
But it didn't really open up space for other people who were testing positive at the same time. And so there was an association, again, because it's related to sex. I could sort of feel an immediate switch in people's tone if I said I hate HIV, that, what kind of a person must I be? And it was much, much, much worse than it is now, but it's not entirely gone, I would have to say.
Do you find it now, by you saying it's not entirely gone, is there still that ignorance? Am I right in saying the word ignorance?
I think so.
Right.
Yeah. And I think the thing is that, so sort of to skip ahead a little bit, I ended up working for the United Nations as an HIV educator, and I did training in-house for our personnel. And sort of two things that happened on a regular basis was, one, me going in as the HIV specialist from New York to do the training. Everything's good. The minute I disclosed, the whole room changed, because I was no longer just a public health specialist in people's mind. I suddenly became this person with HIV and all of their ideas of what that meant, whether they're right or wrong. So I felt the way that people perceived me. I felt that shift dramatically. And the other thing that I had to keep constantly reminding myself is that not everybody knows about HIV. And so it's sort of a cycle. There's cars outside honking.
Oh, don't worry, let them honk away.
Okay.
You're near the busy areas, the Bronx or Brooklyn.
Brooklyn, yeah, it is a loud quarter. Okay. So I had to just constantly remind myself that, I'm starting fresh each and every time, because not everybody knows about HIV, or what they know may be wrong, or they have everybody has different amounts of knowledge. And we used to joke that it was the same meeting, different decade, because we were starting every single time as if nobody knows anything. And I think that's what the ignorance is people they don't, first of all, they don't want to be an expert on it, because if they are, that means it's in their life somehow.
Right.
And so people distance themselves from it. And I understand that, that's a human reaction that makes sense. But consequently, we had a lot of people in my trainings that just didn't know. Some were just not very nice, but mostly the vast majority of people just simply did not know.
So, Martina, if you say they weren't very nice, right, or they did not know, and I suppose I might be related to that as well in previous jobs I've had, where you can show somebody, try to educate them and show them, say, scientific evidence or whatever. But as you mentioned, if they choose not to be associated with it, there's nothing much you can really do. And their opinion is their opinion at the end of the day. You're probably not going to really change that. But what about, I mean, was it difficult then, say, for example, you went for possible jobs or meetings? I mean, back then, did you have to inform individuals that you had HIV? Was that the norm? Did you have to report it? Did you have to tell employers or future employers?
That is an excellent question. So I did not have to tell employers, but I'll tell you an interesting story, which is that I ended up being recruited to work for UNAIDS, which is the UN body that sort of becomes HIV central, if you will, for the whole UN. So they sort of oversee that everybody's doing their part and that no parts are left undone. And so in 1996, I went to Geneva. I was initially on a 3-month contract, but then I had to have, it's like a probation period, and then a medical visit through their medical services to eventually get onto a 2-year contract. The UNAIDS staff actually told me, don't tell medical services, because you're the first one ever to go through the system, and we don't know if they will accept you. Okay. And mind you, this is to work on HIV at UNAIDS, and they still didn't know if I would be allowed into the system. So I didn't tell them. And I got through, and it was fine because my general health was still very good. So unless they did an HIV test, which they're not supposed to do without telling you, they would not have known. The UN judges on your fitness for work. They don't test for specific things.
How did that make you feel then? So you have a double-sided coin here. So you're working for UNAIDS, and then you know that you have HIV, and I don't know how you felt, but I know myself that I'd be kind of like worried that if they did a test and they found out, would they say I was hiding something? Was that going around in your mind all the time, or did you just said to yourself, look, I'm going to be open and honest here, just go with the flow?
I really just went with the flow, because I even though my official job title was NGO liaison, for me, I felt that I was a representative of the community, and I was there more as an in-house activist, not exactly a spy, but an in-house activist.
Right. You were James Bond. Yeah.
Exactly. James Bond, HIV.
HIV. At least you said that.
and so I felt that I had to be open, because otherwise I was letting myself down, if not the whole rest of the community. And I would rather have had the battle with them to say, you're being a hypocrite, saying we want people with HIV to be involved in this program because it's a program for people with HIV, and yet we're not going to accommodate you on staff. I was ready to do battle on that. And I think that my colleagues were also ready, but they also didn't want to force the fight.
Right.
So they're like, just don't say anything. If it comes up, we'll deal with it. But, keep it quiet for the moment until you get your approval and you're on a full-time contract. And then then it'll be easier to do the fight. And I would like to believe, I can't guarantee this 100%, but I would like to believe that the UN has made a lot of progress and would not fire somebody or not hire them simply because they had HIV. That is against our personnel rules.
Would that apply in other industries, do you think?
Not
the same?
necessarily.
No.
No, I think it might not. And I think it also depends on the nature of the work. So if you're doing anything where there's a risk of you cutting your hand and bleeding, for example, they might think that that would be something that they would be afraid of. It would not be legitimate, certainly not at this point, but it might be considered. And I think that there's a perception that it's kind of like this ridiculous idea that, people don't want to hire pregnant women because they're just going to leave or even women in general, just they're just going to go off and have kids and then they won't be in the workforce. They won't be present, right?
Right.
There is a presumption that people with HIV are eventually going to miss a lot of work and get sick and whatever. But those are stigmas. Those are ideas in people's head. They're not really borne out by the facts.
Do you think as well, Martina, that this is the world that we live in? I'm not saying it's right. Corporations and big companies, are they scared to possibly hire, say, a future candidate who maybe has HIV or AIDS, and then it gets out in the open that this member of staff has it, and you generate this fear?
Yeah.
Do you think is this the possibility they're afraid of maybe lawsuits and all this nonsense?
Absolutely. An insurance burden of having to, pay for more health care. What does it look like for the company? How are the other colleagues going to take it? Will colleagues want their families and children around that person? All sorts of things. I'm certain that it goes through people's minds, and it definitely did in those early days. Again, I would like to think we're a little bit beyond that now. I'm not 100% sure we actually are.
No, I don't think we are. I mean, and even with myself, I'll be honest with you, you read something or you see something in the media, and same again, not criticizing the media, but they're usually the information source that we get with regards to certain diseases or things that are going on in the world, and you read it, and then it's exploded. You're trying to get at like, this will kill you, this will make you very ill, and you kind of, without getting your own research. That's what I try to do myself now. I try to educate myself a little bit further and get my own research to find out the facts and the figures, rather than just, relying on one or two sources of information. But back then as well, I mean, I had heard, now tell me again if I'm an idiot, but I'd heard that if somebody had known in the workplace that somebody had HIV, they wouldn't drink from the same cup as them, or they wouldn't use the same toilet. Was that just somebody telling stories, or did those type of things happen?
Those things absolutely happen. Absolutely. Yep. When I first joined UNICEF, which is another part of my UN career, the fellow who worked across from me, who was a lovely, lovely, lovely person, but somebody who had not been educated about HIV, just as I started to put up posters about HIV, because that's my job, right?
Mm-hmm.
He said, I hate it when people with HIV come to my desk, because then I have to clean everything. I have to disinfect everything on my desk.
Wow.
And I just stood there and I looked at him and I said, you're going to have to get over that, because I didn't know what else to say. And I sort of turned around and he looked confused. And gradually, we had conversations, and he became educated and came around and ended up being, one of my greatest supporters. And he was a wonderful colleague, but he just didn't know. And that was in 2003.
So it was quite recent.
Yeah, much more recent.
Right.
Yeah.
So it wasn't the case like when you sneezed, they didn't evacuate the building, did they? And bring in the hazmat suits with the disinfectants and the sprays. I mean, it wasn't like that, was it?
No, they put police tape up around my desk, but no, they didn't.
Okay. You cellophane around your desk, you have little holes to breathe out of or something.
Exactly. I wasn't allowed to use elevators.
Okay.
No, I'm exaggerating. Yeah. But no, they were actually very, very supportive and wonderful. But that doesn't mean that people didn't have fears of working with me.
Yes. What was the worst one you had? What was the worst experience you felt that you kind of went, oh, this is, you may be close to tears, or you just thought you've had enough?
Oh my goodness, there were so many. I There was an HR officer actually at UNAIDS at one point who, first of all, said they only hired me because they felt sorry for me.
Well, that was nice.
Yeah, lovely.
Yeah.
And then we were in another meeting, and I asked him, and mind you, this is UNAIDS, right? Our whole purpose in the world is to, change the course of this pandemic and support people living with HIV.
Yes.
And I asked him, I said, if you were in a meeting with people with HIV, first of all, would you go? And secondly, if there was food, what would you do? And he said, I would go because it's my job, but I would never eat any of the food, and I wouldn't share food with you.
Okay.
So that was also, and this is in an environment where, you have birthday cakes or celebrations at the end of the year or whatever. There are occasions. And that sort of brought it into reality for me that this person is actively trying to avoid close contact with me, even though I'm just a colleague. I think that hurt a lot because it was early on. As I went through my career, it continued. Other people said other things, but it hurt less because I cared less.
And relationships, say family members, how did they react to the news? And how did things improve as the years went on?
Yeah. Oh, yeah, absolutely. My siblings, I have many of them, and they were all extraordinary. My parents, I was raised very Catholic, and it took them a bit of time to sort of digest the information. My mom was always a little bit not really sure if she was 100% supportive or not, but that was sort of regardless of HIV. It was just sort of who she was.
Right.
My father was wonderful. I was afraid that he would be judgmental or, not accept me. And he was the absolute opposite. He was what a good Catholic should be. He was just loving and wonderful. And absolutely over the years, I actually got to a point where I felt like I'd almost wished I'd never told them because I didn't get sick and die. So I sort of worried them for all those
years. You're still here.
I'm still here. Like, there's a line in, I don't know if it's Nick Cave or who it was, but what good is a disease that doesn't kill you?
Oh yeah, but it's gas. It is because it's like your parents and family and other relations. They're really thinking, oh, she's still here, but the media said she'd be gone by now. Exactly. How come she's still here? Yeah. Anyway, sorry.
Yeah. Yeah. No. It was a very strange dynamic to deal with because we all had this, thought the worst because that's what I was sort of told to think. And then 5 years came and I didn't get sick, and 10 years and 15 years. And I ended up being somebody who didn't need treatment for 16 years.
Wow.
Which is very unusual. One virologist I used to work with said I was a little green monkey. I had some special gene that kept me from becoming ill. And I think the main reason that I finally did need treatment was because I was working with the UN and I was traveling all the time. So I was wearing my body down way more than I should have been. And my body was just like, I can't keep up. You need 3 months off to sleep. And the job wasn't having it, and HIV took advantage and just let loose, and everything went haywire in a period of like 6 months. And then it became a matter of you either start treatment or you die. And that was in 2007.
And what is the treatment, Martine? I mean, like I'm not a medical doctor. I'm not here to talk about tell anybody that's listening to this, do this or do that. But in your situation, what was the treatment that you were given?
So I am taking antiretroviral medications. And at this point, it's one pill once a day. And I'm also not a pharmacologist or a doctor, so I'm not going to tell you what it's made of. I don't know. It's a bunch of good stuff they put into this little pink tablet, and I take it. And it works, and it keeps the viral load, which is the amount of virus in my body, undetectable. And the great thing about that is science has said that as long as you are undetectable, they can't detect a viral load in your blood, then you are untransmissible. So U equals U is a new campaign, meaning that if you're undetectable, you can't give the virus to somebody else.
That's brilliant. I mean,
yes, it is. Absolutely.
And do you have any symptoms from this wonderful pill you take?
I have been very lucky. I have not had symptoms. And part of why I think I'm so lucky is because I started treatment much later. So I was what we call treatment naive. People who had started other things to test it before the really good medications were available. Some of those people had a lot of side effects and problems with the medication. Whereas for me, I started it, it worked. We've changed it a little bit over the years just because new things become available. But I have not had any problems. I'm really lucky for that.
That's brilliant. I mean, has the numbers, I'll ask you two questions. I'll ask you the first question. Has the numbers of HIV come down around the globe, or is it still similar to years ago?
It's still similar, unfortunately. I looked it up and there are about 38 million people living with HIV globally. Wow. And more than half the cases are women.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah, which is, again, something that I certainly didn't know in 92. But even today, I think many people are surprised because that is not the perception we have in North America or in Europe. But in fact, yeah, more than half the cases are women. And at least in North America, the cases actually had a little bit of a bump up again during COVID because services stopped.
Oh, okay.
The interventions that would help people avoid getting exposed or get more information or be tested even, those all stopped. And so we've seen a little blip there, but hopefully we'll be able to reverse that again. And
are the numbers of deaths going up, or is it has it leveled off, or has, because of science and medication, has it improved?
Excellent question, David.
Thank you.
The 2 stars.
I thought of it myself. There we go.
There you go. The numbers of deaths have actually, I would say, leveled off. And that is because of treatment. And now we have a whole new phenomenon, which I am also part of, is aging with HIV. And in the United States, for example, there's actually a huge percentage of people who are over 50 and still living with HIV versus new cases of younger people. And that's because we've all managed to stay alive, which nobody anticipated. So in these 40 years, I have friends who have had HIV for 40 years, and I've had it for more than 30. And there's a whole cohort of us getting old with HIV, which is a great thing because we didn't think we'd be here.
Yes.
But it's also science is yet again trying to figure out, okay, what do we do with this? Is it different? What do we know? So people are definitely living longer lives if they have access to healthcare.
Relationship-wise, so we'll probably move on to the testing bit now in a minute. I know I had asked you a kind of basic question, but you're going to update it based on testing. That's probably the last 30 or 40 years it's improved. But relationship-wise, before we move on to that, for anybody that has HIV or has been diagnosed with HIV, what would you recommend them to do if they meet somebody that they like, they have HIV? Do you tell the individual? I mean...
Yeah, that's a tricky question. So, if for anybody who just heard what I said about U equals U, undetectable equals untransmissible, that is a great scientific achievement. However, at least for me, I think there is still a moral responsibility to tell the other person, because it is only fair to give them all of the information possible so they can make an informed decision.
Yes.
So I would always say, get to know a person. First of all, make sure you like them, approach things slowly.
That helps.
Give it time. Yeah. It helps in general, regardless of HIV.
That's it.
And then when you feel like, okay, this is a person I think I can trust, then tell them before any intimate activity ever happens, just so You give them the chance to make their own informed decision, and then you can also see how they react. And if they freak out and run away, well, so much the better. You got rid of that one.
Yeah.
If they're, say, I need to think about this a little bit. I'm not saying no, but give me a moment to digest it. I'd say that's fine. And of course, if they say, I have had lots of friends with HIV. I know a lot about it. I'm okay with this. We'll take it slow. Then that's a keeper.
Have you ever had experience with this yourself throughout the years? Have you ever encountered where you maybe began to like somebody and then they ran for the hills?
I've had a few run for the hills. Yeah.
Right. And how did you feel? Just for anybody that's listening generally, I mean, because obviously to find out you have HIV and then you're trying to get on with your life and you're trying to do normal things and you meet somebody you like, and then how did you feel, or how did you handle that?
Oh, relationships are hard. And I think, at the best of times, relationships are hard. And with HIV, you already, at least for me, and I think for a lot of people, we sort of add that extra layer of now I'm broken, nobody's going to want me or whatever, which is not smart to do, but I think it is a very human thing to do. It's sort of a natural reaction. And then to be rejected, certainly the first few times, it hurts a lot because you feel like the person is not able to see me as the person. They're only seeing this virus. So it's very painful. But then eventually you sort of intellectually become able to separate that that's their fears.
Yes.
And that's their limitation. That's their unwillingness to be educated. And that's somebody who probably is not able to have a deep relationship anyway, if they're not willing to at least talk about this with you. If they run for the hills, it's much better to let them run, give them a bottle of water for the road and say, good luck.
Yeah. Thanks for the memories. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
It was nice. Yeah. No, I think like anything else, it's it's great now that the science is there. You can get medication, you can live your life, and it's just part of the process. As opposed with any relationship, if somebody doesn't like you, whether you have 7 toes or you have something else going on, they're not meant to be.
Exactly. But it's hard, it's really hard in those moments because you're human, and everybody wants to be loved. That's normal. And yeah, it hurts when it's something that is external, that, it's not a character flaw. It's a physiological issue.
Yes.
And so it hurts. Yeah.
Do you ever feel, you don't have to answer this if you don't want to, Martina, but do you ever feel that life has been unfair to you because you had HIV? You know what I'm trying to get at? Did you ever feel that you're kind of like, why me? Is there that part as well?
I certainly did at the beginning. I very much felt that. And sort of a side note, I was recently with my family, and one of my nieces is 28, so the same age I was. She has a child who's a year old, married, in a great relationship, having a wonderful life. And there were moments when I was looking at her thinking, this was the life I sort of thought I might have, a life like hers, and mine got yanked away. And so even as recently as like a month ago, that feeling of I got cheated bubbled up, which surprised me. But I absolutely felt that in the early years, like everything got stolen. I wasn't going to have any of these things or experiences or relationships. In reality, now, 30 years later, I look back, I've had an extraordinary life. And some of it because I had HIV, because I ended up on this path of being an educator, an activist, of speaking up about HIV, trying to support other people living with HIV. I ended up at the UN for almost like 20 years off and on in different positions. And it was amazing. And I have no reason to believe that would necessarily have happened otherwise. So I can't really complain now. Now I realize I've had an extraordinary life, but absolutely at the beginning, I felt cheated.
Okay, let's move on then to the testing. So the general question I was going to ask you, which you've correctly pointed out, I mean, the test to diagnose. So anybody here is listening that may feel they need to go get testing. So the difference between when you got tested and now, has there been progression? And can you explain the different types of tests?
So I can only sort of explain the different kinds of tests in 2022 because surprisingly, I don't get tested for HIV anymore. Exactly. I'm pretty sure that I have it, so I don't get tested. But basically, they're very simple tests, and I think it's a mouth swab at this point is the easiest one. There's also just a needle stick, finger prick, I guess you would say. And then there are other blood tests where they actually draw blood from your veins and test it that way. So there are different levels, and you could do a simple HIV test, kind of like a pregnancy test or a rapid test for COVID. And if it comes back positive, then you'd go for verification in a lab. The main difference now is even if you're going to the lab, you can get those results probably within 24 hours.
Wow, okay. That's quick.
When I was, yeah, it's a very fast turnaround. And when I was tested positive, you had to wait a few weeks. Those are very long weeks.
Yes.
You know, when you're like, I don't know what's wrong with me. Maybe it's HIV, maybe it's not. I didn't really think it was going to be HIV, only because I'd never seen another woman with HIV that I knew of. But of course, it was lingering in my mind. Well, maybe it is, because nothing else is, my doctor can't figure out what else is wrong with me. And those were a lot of anguished days and nights waiting for that result.
The doctors themselves, so now, I mean, with all the education that you're providing to others, the doctors now, in your own opinion, when they inform somebody that they have HIV, is it more of a positive experience than a, or you have HIV? Did they talk down to you years ago when you had it compared to now?
That's an excellent question. Another 2 stars for you, sir.
Thanks very much. Cheers.
I think at the time, the doctors didn't exactly talk down to me, but they didn't know what to do with me because they didn't have female patients.
Right.
So it was not 100% clear how to deal with me. I was not their, regular patient. And it was sort of almost more dismissive than talking down. I mean, nobody really knew, kind of like with COVID now, we were all just figuring it out and they were figuring it out. But I sort of created this new conundrum for them. Like, oh my goodness, I've dealt with gay men with HIV, but I don't know what to do with this woman with HIV.
Right.
I also would say that for the most part, almost every doctor I've had has been really quite lovely, and they have been respectful of me. I don't know if that is the case for everybody, though. And I think it depends a lot on your location. If you're in New York City or San Francisco or Geneva or Brussels, Dublin, probably they have excellent access to information. They're well educated about it. They have experiences to draw from. They're hopefully going to be understanding and helpful and just honest with you and say, this is what it is. This is what it means in this time and place. You can start treatment when needed or now if it is needed at the time, whatever. If you test positive in, the middle of America, in a rural state, in a rural part of that state, I don't know. It depends on what the doctor has been exposed to themselves, how they're going to try and educate you. So a lot of it depends on where you are when you're tested. I'm not sure that really answers the question, but
No, I get what you mean. Like, so say, for example, right, you are maybe in an area or a state or some place in the world where they're not fully aware of HIV and and the help out there. I mean, is there any United Nations platform, or can you recommend anything for anybody that kind of said, look, I want to go and get the best best help I can get, the best information I get. Is there platforms or systems out there where an individual, say they're living in Florida, for example, and they want to go, they hear that, Brooklyn has the best in the country. Can that be arranged?
So, yes, I would say that if you are in any country, there's probably some public health branch of the government. In the United States, it's called the CDC, the Center for Disease Control. They, for example, have a website, and within that website, they have a huge amount of information for people like us, individuals, normal people, versus for the medical professionals. And there they keep a database of what services are available wherever you are. There are also networks of people living with HIV. And there are a couple of global networks, and they can tap you into a local network within your country that can help you find information and just sort of to get the skinny on what it's like for people with HIV where you live.
Right.
So I would say those are things that I would look out for. UNAIDS keeps a database that has global statistics, but it's not necessarily going to point you in the direction of, I take that back. UNAIDS does have country program managers in every country where it works, which is probably not Dublin, probably not Brooklyn. But if you're living in a less industrialized country, you may be able to find the name of the person who's the UNAIDS program coordinator, and they can help you at least guide you, or they will have a local website that will tell you who are the services and who are the communities of people living with HIV, because that is their job. That's why they're there. They're there to sway the government and make sure they're doing what they can, but they're also there to support people. Like, not on every single individual in a country comes to them by any means, but they facilitate that there is support for people living with HIV in a given country.
And the great thing as well, Martina, is that you're an example that you can have a life with HIV. So you're a great inspiration to anybody that is listening to this and want to find out more information. So it is a case of you can. So if anybody's panicking right now, listen to this, or they've just been diagnosed with HIV, and they're hearing all this negativity, you can live a normal life, isn't it?
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah. As normal as I can be. I'm not sure how normal I am, but but in terms of HIV, I can live an absolutely a normal life. My health is not particularly damaged because of HIV, because I've been very lucky, but I've also been vigilant with making sure I get the care I need when I need it. And I think that one of the best things that a person can do is to find a community of other people living with HIV where they live. Find a support group of other like-minded people, and get to know what their experiences are, doctors that they prefer, doctors they would avoid, services they have found. And I actually was a little bit resistant to support groups at the beginning myself for some reason, but once I got into that, I realized it made all the difference, so that I knew that I was not alone, and I literally knew other people with HIV to compare notes with, just to commiserate with, to whine with, whatever you need to do. It makes a huge difference. And I see that again and again and again as I've met people with HIV over the years. The ones that are really thriving are often the ones that have a community of people with HIV beyond just their own support network. Because you realized, I'm not the only one. There are other people, and it's okay. And they're living lives, and they're interacting in the world. They're working, they're having families, they're doing all the things that everybody else does. I think that information is best digested when it's given from another person with HIV.
Well, here's a different question for you, Martina. You don't have to answer if you don't want to. Why do you think, in your own opinion, we see a lot of, especially with companies and corporations, and you see a lot of images per se, and it talks about, say, diversity, and then we have the LGBTQ. Am I saying that correctly? I don't offend anybody. Is
Yep.
LGBT? Yeah. The why when we see, now this is what I've seen. I'm not saying it's going to be the same in the States or anywhere else, but this is what I see is that when we see an image of somebody that may have HIV, it's sometimes a child in Africa or somebody who's on death's door.
Mm-hmm.
Why do you think, is it portrayed on these social media platforms, company platforms, a healthy looking individual like yourself?
Another 2 stars for you, sir. That's an excellent question.
Thank you. That's a Joe Rogan. Watch out, Joe Rogan. I'm coming. Oh, Joe.
I I think that the answer to that is sensationalizing things sells.
Okay.
It's the same for any other coverage. We see more, coverage about the impact of war and the devastation of communities than we do about the individuals who are maybe making a difference to try and reverse the conflict, or the one person who's doing all of these great things in country X due to a conflict.
Right.
We get a few of those little special interest stories of some individual, the good news parts, but the majority of it is the bad news part, because it's what captivates people. But there have been a lot of campaigns trying to change that, at least around HIV, showing that people do live normal lives and are vibrant, contributing members of society, showing people healthy and active. I think there's a concerted effort to try and change that, but again, it comes back to the ignorance part that it's sort of fallen out of the news cycle for some time because HIV is not resolved, but it has not been getting worse and worse and worse. So it's not as fancy to cover as it is to cover, the Ebola outbreaks or the war in Syria, or I'm trying to think of other things that were happening in those sort of middle years.
Yes.
But now it's sort of, we need to cover it again. And so sometimes the people who are creating the news stories, maybe they don't have the knowledge that they should. And so they revert back to those horrible, horrible images that are not helpful for anybody, just to get people to think about it. And I don't think that they are useful. I don't think they're impactful. I think they just shut people up even more because nobody wants to see that.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, maybe scagging photographs of like men with six packs and women that have, in their bikinis or something like that, because honestly, it does. It gives you that, when you look, you kind of like going, I'm sure that child that's in Africa is not the only one that has HIV. You know what I mean? Yeah. I'm sure there's other people in different countries. And why are we showing this image? Everybody's pushing this, let's be fair, diverse. And I totally get it. But let's move on with the times and educate more. And that's where my next question is going to move into. So how do we educate ourselves more? I know you mentioned you do a lot of work with UNAIDS, but what can we do? I mean, if you were, say, you're running the global world tomorrow, what would you point people towards to say, look, this is what you need to do to try and educate yourself if you want to educate yourself?
So as an individual, I would say, again, go back to whatever is your public health platform in the country where you live and look to see if they have verified information about HIV that pertains to your country or your location, wherever you are. Start there. And everybody should know about HIV. It is, I feel, just sort of a human duty in 2022 still to know about HIV, even if it's not for yourself, so that you can educate other people. If you have children, if you have nieces or nephews or other younger people in your life that you want to make sure that you can educate them. And then I would also say that as companies, because we talk about businesses, what we did with the UN, when I joined UNICEF in 2003, I ended up being a part of a small sort of self-appointed team from different parts of the UN. And we conceptualized, created, and eventually got approved and implemented an HIV in the Workplace program for the whole United Nations.
Wow.
And that was no small thing.
No.
It was a major undertaking, and it took us years. But eventually the program was approved, and it was up and running in 100 different countries, more than 100, like 120 different countries. And the idea behind it was, we don't, how dare we tell the rest of the world what to do if we're not doing it in-house, right?
Yeah.
And we did that primarily to support UN personnel living with HIV who were not getting the support they needed because their workplace was not as comfortable as it should have been. So in a very immediate, selfish sense, we did that because we wanted to make sure that anybody in any UN office, if they have HIV or they suspected they could have HIV, that they would feel comfortable to be tested and rely on the system to support them.
Right.
We also did that to be a role model so that we could say, our business, in this case, the UN, UNICEF, UNDP, whoever, we're doing it. Can we help you do it for your company or for your branch of the government? Because that's one of the best ways to educate people, even if it's a little workshop once a year, just to give the basic information. This is what it is. This is what you need to know. This is how you prevent it. If you're positive, this is the personnel policy for this company. We will indeed support you. Your medications will be covered, whatever it is. It could be folded into a health day where they also talk about heart disease or diabetes or other issues that people, or COVID. It could be a number of things that get covered. But I think it's important to not forget to include it, to not think that, oh, that happened in the 90s or the 80s, it's over with. It should still be included on a list of health issues that people need to know about, because that is the responsible thing to do as an employer, as a government, whoever it is that's sort of the big boss. They should be thinking about that. And I think as an individual, if somebody is concerned or not even necessarily for themselves, there's no reason they couldn't go to their own HR offices and say, what do you think about doing a health day? And maybe I'll help you organize it. And we'll just have an afternoon where we sit around and everybody brings their lunch and we talk about these different issues that our staff are either dealing with directly or could be, or, maybe in the future their kids need to know about. Let's give our personnel the opportunity to learn in a safe environment so they don't have to go out and find the information on their own, because it can be very scary.
Did you love your work there? I mean, it seems so rewarding what you were doing, but I mean, did you wake up in the morning going, woof, did you ever pinch yourself?
There were moments when I definitely pinched myself. And I would say overwhelmingly, yes, I loved my work. It was very, very rewarding. I felt very proud of what we did. But there also came a point after a couple decades when I was sort of like, I'm just really tired.
Right.
And the work was meaningful, but it wasn't necessarily addressing my own personal needs.
Right.
As Martina, who existed long before HIV, who wanted to be a writer, who wanted to travel, just to travel, not for work, who wanted to do other things, the artistic person. And so I eventually left because I was sort of burnt out.
Right.
But to this day, I am still extremely proud of the work that we did. And there were absolutely moments when I pinched myself going, wow, I am the luckiest person I know to get to do this work, because I really believe in it. And I felt, I slept well at night, if you will, because I knew that I was trying to put good into the world versus just trying to help some gazillionaire make more gazillions that I would never see.
Well, I'm telling you, lots of gazillionaires out there these days, isn't there? Anyway.
Oh my goodness.
If only it was us, Martina, we could
Exactly.
we could be gazillionaires. What about then, I mean, with this pinch me moments, and I'm sure there's somebody listening to this, obviously it's a wellbeing career world, so there's career part of it as well. To get into that job in the United Nations systems, but I mean, what is the squishy underbelly of the United Nations? I'm dying to find out. What do you mean by that?
So that what I mean is, the UN is, I believe, the largest bureaucracy in the world.
No comment. Overruled. No comment. They'll be at my door in 5 minutes to have this call traced.
I didn't say the worst, but I think the biggest, only because there's a presence everywhere in the world, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so the nature of the UN also is to respond to crises. So something bad happens, the UN goes in to try and help fix it. We also try to work with governments to avoid things happening in the first place. But behind all of that are individuals, right? The however many 100, 200,000 people that work for the UN, is probably more than that. I don't know the actual count. If you counted every single person affiliated, I'm sure it's hundreds of thousands. So all of those people are individuals. And the squishy underbelly is the part that is supposed to be also taking care of our own personnel, that gets bogged down in the fact that governments give money to the UN to take care of emergencies. They do not give money to the UN to take care of UN personnel.
Right.
And so that's where the disconnect is, and that's where that squishy underbelly is, that you have to sort of go in and poke at it and say, hey, yes, we have to do all of these things out in the world, but we can't do any of them if we're not taking care of our own staff, because that's our workforce, right? If we don't have a healthy, viable workforce, we are not going to be a successful business. We have to take care of our own. And so we were constantly going in and sort of poking at that squishy underbelly that did not want to be poked, until they finally said, okay, leave us alone. Fine. We're going to let you do this program. And it ended up changing the whole way that the UN takes care of staff in general. Didn't fix everything, but it opened up the doors a little bit more for other people to come and say, okay, great, you're talking about HIV. What about these issues? What about parents with children who have special needs? How are we dealing with that if they need a little more time off during the workday for medical appointments? There are any number of issues that could be raised. And that's what I think of as sort of basically the internal mechanisms to support staff within the UN, which are remarkably small compared to the enormity of the UN and its mandate.
So generally, Marty, you're trying to tell me that for any listener there trying to get a job with the UN, the United Nations, is that it's not about the gym membership, it's not about the staff travel benefits, it's what is it? So generally, because most people these days, it's all about, you've explained it so beautifully, but it's all about, what's the benefits? Do we get free membership? Do we get money off Walgreens, or do we get Walmart tokens or whatever it is, or coupons? So Martina has explained it very nicely. It does none of that. But actually, by the way, do you have a gym membership for United Nations?
No, no.
And what are the travel benefits like, Martina? Tell me.
Oh my goodness, so. I will say, as a human being, the part that I do miss, I miss over any flight over 8 hours, you get to go in business class.
Oh, nice.
Because you're going for business, right? The idea is you're supposed to get off the plane and go to work.
Yes.
So I missed that because I'm not paying for business class on my own, but I sure did enjoy it. The benefits, we had 6 weeks paid vacation.
Oh, wow. Okay, that's pretty good.
Brilliant. Certainly
Yeah.
compared to the United States, where you get about 6 hours, I think.
If you're lucky.
If you're
If
lucky.
you're lucky.
Exactly. And not
Yeah.
all on one day, right?
Yeah. Oh, you're still
So
breathing. Oh, come into work if you're still breathing. Yeah, come on. But I can't walk. Doesn't matter. You're breathing. Here
doesn't
you
matter.
go.
Exactly. And the jobs are very well paid. Not as well paid as Silicon Valley or the tech sector, or probably many, many other parts of the world, but of the workforce. But all things considered, it's very well paid, good environment, generally a supportive environment. And to me, the best part was working with other extraordinary people. So a job in the UN is an excellent job. I have no regrets about that. And I felt very, very lucky to have had the jobs that I had. And I very much appreciated the benefits and my little glass of champagne in business class.
You sold it so well, Martina. They're not going to be tracing this call anymore. United Nations, we love you. Let's move on to your artistic side before we go. It's nearly the pain is nearly over, Martina, talking to me. But anyway, so the artistic side, you have a book which is My Unexpected Life, an international memoir of two pandemics, HIV and COVID-19. So the title pretty much gives it away. But what is it about? So what can readers or listeners expect?
Yeah, it's sort of a braided memoir that weaves my personal story as a woman living with HIV, with my work specifically with the United Nations and how we tried to change the system we did change the system from within. And then because of the nature of the work, traveling all the time, there's a lot of travel, sort of a travel memoir element to it as well. And the book starts, sort of the very beginning when I found out I had HIV, and then my path of becoming an activist and the different forums that took until I ended up at the UN. And then because I was doing the final edits during COVID, and because I am a virus overachiever, I also had COVID early on in March of 2020.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah, lucky me.
Look at you. The universe is looking after you, Martina.
It just is. It said, you have a good book, but let's make it a great book. Let's have another pandemic for you.
Yeah, here we go.
So I bookended the whole manuscript with COVID. So it starts actually comparing COVID to living in San Francisco in the mid 80s and the onset of the AIDS pandemic. And then throughout, it weaves some similarities, and I make reference to things that are similar, things that are very different, just my own observations of the two pandemics, and then winds up with talking a little bit about my own experience with having COVID-19, which surprisingly has done more like physical damage in 2 years than HIV in 30.
Yeah, it's amazing, isn't it?
It's very weird.
It's very strange. We won't get into that right now. Let's sell your book. Let's talk. Okay. So I'm on your website, martinaclark.com. And okay, where can you buy the book? I mean, I'm looking where you can buy it pretty much everywhere. And I do love Barnes and Noble. I'm not, upsetting the rest of the shops that are out there, but you can't beat a Barnes and Noble.
Barnes and Nobles are great. Love them.
Really good. They're really
good.
Yeah.
And it's also distributed through independent bookstores. So if you're a person who doesn't want to go to anything bigger than the corner bookstore, you can request that they order it for you. If you're in the States and you want a copy signed, I have some. I can send them to people. You can order it directly through me, through the website, which is martina-clark.com.
I forgot to say the hyphen. I do apologize.
That's okay.
I apologize.
It will probably still come up anyway, but
okay.
Yeah. And it's basically, it's available anywhere books are sold. You can get it. And the sort of last default, of course, is Amazon, which I confess to using Amazon. I don't love to support Amazon. I wish there was a different existence of that company because it's very helpful, but again, we get back to the gazillionaires and their spaceships.
There's Uncle Jeff on the phone. He's tracing this call again.
Exactly.
Him and Yvonne are tracing this. What did she just say? How dare she? So, what about I'm looking at your website. It's pretty cool. You have your blog. You've published pieces about yourself, awards and press. So the 2022 finalist for Social Change American Writing Awards. What was that?
There are many contests for books, and that one is quite prestigious, I suppose we could say. And
well done,
basically, thank you. Yeah, you submit your book and they read it, and if they like it, they give you a little prize for it, and then you can tell people on podcasts that you've won a couple of awards for your book.
You're very bashful. You should be promoting this. You should be standing in front of in Brooklyn somewhere. Just shouting out the top of your voice, telling, look what I won, look what I won. So you're on social media as well. Not like myself very much. I'm a bit of a Enya. Have you heard of Enya? Have you?
I have.
Yeah, Enya, the kind of amazing singer she is, but she just kind of stays away from the limelight. So I'm a bit like that myself, but you're not, Martina. You are on, you have Facebook, Instagram, you're on the LinkedIn's, the Twitter, YouTube, anywhere else?
I think that's pretty much it.
That's Facebook. Yeah, I think I said that one. Yep. So generally, if somebody was to get in touch with you just through the website, contact you there, ask you questions, you have no problem with that. So you've heard it here first, everybody. Martina says you can contact her day and night, and she'll ask her any questions that you have.
Yes, yes, I would be delighted. It would be an honor to answer questions. And if for any reason somebody asks a question that I feel is not appropriate, I will say, here's why it's not appropriate, and don't ask anybody else. But here's where you can find the information.
That's the best way.
There you go. Because I think that people, everybody has the right to have access to information. But I'm happy to answer questions. I'm very open and have been for more than 30 years about HIV, and be delighted to answer questions for people. Or speak if somebody's got if you do a book group and you decide you want to read this and you want to have a Zoom session with me, I'm happy to Zoom in, or a class that you're teaching. I'm here.
Or corporations.
Yeah, anybody wants to talk about, absolutely. I can talk about workplace programs. Absolutely.
You can fly her over business class.
There you go.
Once it's more than 8 hours. Once it's you pay off the environmentally friendly trees. That's what you can do to offset her carbon emissions. She'll be more than delighted, she will, to chat. But it's been a joy today to chat to Martina Clark. I'll put all the links once
wonderful.
The podcast is approved into Martina, so you can get in touch, she says. So it's been a joy to chat with you today, Martina. Thanks so much for chatting with me today on the podcast. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.